Hello, friends. Welcome to a very special installment of the New York Review of Science Fiction reading series at a special time to accommodate our special author, Jonathan Carroll, who is in Vienna. We usually do these readings on the first Tuesday evening of every month, but in order to accommodate Jonathan, we have moved it. I will just quickly mention that next month's reading will be at usual time, which will be the first Tuesday, which is February 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And our reader then will be Kate Elliott. I will also mention below Jim, who is, of course, the producer of our series, has listed our PayPal link. We need donations to keep this series running. To keep the software going, and of course, eventually, if we can reach a point to do this live again. So please don't feel guilty if you can't donate, but if you can, it would really help all of us out. So I just want to, of course, always thank Jim and Barbara Krasnoff, who will be our audience wrangler this afternoon or this evening if you're listening from Europe, which I hope you are. This is a big moment for me, I would have to say. I'm a little bit of a fan of Jonathan Carroll, just a teeny weeny bit. Going back at least 25 years. I don't know if this is true for other people, but I find that there are certain times when you encounter an author and you first pick up one of their books, like you can remember where you are. I had previously read Jonathan Carroll's Uh-Oh City, which will be mentioned in his bio, in FNSF, and it hit me at the time. But I just have this profound recollection of being in the Bryant Library in Roslyn Heights, New York, and picking up this book in the new fiction From the Teeth of Angels, which I know is reversed to you, so you can't see it, but I will tell you that what it is. And it hit me really hard. His books are wonderful. And if you want an entree, you can't do better than to pick up a copy of his new book, which just came out today, this month, sorry, Mr. Breakfast, which today was reviewed in the Washington Post by Michael Dirda, who is a big deal in the world of reviewing at heights at which I, a humble Kirkus and Locus reviewer, will never reach. So it's worth it to go read that review and then also to go read the book. So today we will hear Jonathan read from Mr. Breakfast, and then we will engage in a brief interview in which I will attempt to not be too insanely fangirlish, which is frankly a little struggle for me because, as I say, his work has had a really profound effect on my creative life as, frankly, a reader. And I hope that his work will have that effect on you too. So let me just give you his bio, and then we will introduce the person you actually are here to listen to. Jonathan Carroll is an American fiction writer primarily known for novels that may be labeled magical realism, slipstream, or contemporary fantasy. He has lived in Austria since 1974. Carroll's short story, Friend's Best Man, won the World Fantasy Award. His novel, Outside the Dog Museum, won the British Fantasy Award, and his collection of short stories won the Bram Stoker Award. The short story Uh-Oh City won the French Grand Prix de l'Imaginaire. His short story Home in the Rain was chosen as one of the best stories of the year by the Pushcart Prize committee. Carroll has been a runner-up for the World Fantasy Award, the Hugo and British Fantasy Awards. My friends, here is Jonathan Carroll.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Vienna, in a way.
Well, before you get started, quick question. I know that you are a dog person because dogs appear in nearly all of your books. You know, some people are cat people. You are decidedly a dog person. Do you have a dog right now?
I always have a dog. I used to have bull terriers, which are sort of always a part of my books. But Vienna put in a law some years ago where they classified bull terriers as dangerous, and so it's almost impossible to have one. So I went to the pound and got got a non-bull terrier who's actually at my feet right now.
And what's your dog's name?
Bean, as in jumping bean.
That's totally. Oh, I guess that's where you get names like Pinecone from, isn't it?
Yeah, people are always saying to me, you know, why such strange names for dogs? One of them was named Beehive, and the other one was named Nails. And I said, I just hate it when I hear people say, you know, Spot or Bowser or what, you know, sort of cliche. Dogs are individuals. They need individual names.
Would you like to share and give a reading for us from Mr. Breakfast? And then I'll ask you some more questions.
I will. Wait a minute. Let me get set up here. It's always been hard for me when asked to read a section of a book because if you don't have the context, it doesn't work. So what I do is I read from the beginning, and that's usually the best way to do it. Here we go. Do you want to talk about Patterson now? We don't have to if you don't want to. Ruth Murphy's face went through a whole Olympics of different expressions: anger, sadness, resignation, before she spoke. Patterson the joker, right? The jokester, the clown, the idiot. That's the Graham that I knew. Back then, what would the man not do for a laugh? I assume you know about the time with the prosthetic arm. They were going to arrest him. They had him in handcuffs, for God's sake. But he was so over-the-top goofy with the cops, he made them laugh too. So they let him go. That time. There were others, and they didn't end so happily. She knew she wasn't being fair or telling the whole truth, because there were so many other things she had loved about Patterson. But now she was old and alone, and old love unfulfilled can sometimes fester. The interviewer said gently, but that was in his career as a comedian, long before he became famous and disappeared. You were together a long time. "3 years we stayed together because I loved him. You can love someone and still think they're an idiot. I want to show you something." In the old woman's lap was a battered, sun-bleached manila envelope. Opening it, she slowly slid out a large photograph. One side had a large crease, and overall the picture had not been well cared for. She handed it to James Arthur, the interviewer. He took one look and nodded. Of course he'd seen it before. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people had seen it before. "It's a very well-known picture, Miss Murphy." "I know," she said irritably, having heard the condescension in his voice. "But it's my line." "Excuse me?" Arthur straightened his back and tried to control the disbelief in his voice. "He used my line. I said that. Or rather, I wrote it to him on a note right after we broke up. Turn the picture over and read what's on the back." The man did, and saw written there in handwriting that was instantly recognizable to him. "To Ruthie, who gave me the beginning with a brownie. Thank you for that, and for so much more. Great love, Graham." Whoa, amazing. That's hard to believe. I'm sure you know how famous this photo is. It's on par with anything by William Eggleston. Personally, I think it's better. Ruth grumbled. "I didn't say I took it. That was all Graham's doing. The picture, the way he framed the image, the lighting. He found the location. That was all him. But the line itself was mine. I even remember writing it to him on a postcard." Patterson would never say where the billboard was. It's part of the mystery of the photograph. She touched her white hair, creating a little drama before spilling the beans. Hallett, Nevada, somewhere up in the Eureka district. Graham said it was originally called Hell, it's Nevada, but they changed the name in the 1930s because the town was getting rich and the citizens wanted to make it sound more respectable. But when the silver mines nearby went bust in the 1950s, the place started dying and never stopped. In its heyday, everyone in town hung out at Mr. Breakfast. It was apparently Hallett's social center. Wait. I'm writing this down. How do you know all this? Ruth Murphy moved slowly back and forth in her chair, trying to find a comfortable position. At least one she could share more comfortably with her arthritis. The last days were closing in on her, and she knew it. She had no legacy, a son she had not seen for 2 years, no business to pass on, and no life's work she had created that would continue to exist after she was gone. Nothing to show the future world there had once been a woman named Ruth Murphy. No, she knew the only thing that she might bring her a few footnotes in some biography or a line in an appendix was the fact she had lived with Graham Patterson before he became Patterson. James Arthur handed the renowned photo back to her. She looked at it thoughtfully, pursing her lips. It showed a large, run-down, vandalized, and badly boarded up salmon-colored roadside diner, set alone on some bleak desert stretch of highway that looked like it could have just as well been on the moon. The first word to come to mind on seeing the image was forlorn. The diner had a long faded red and white sign over the front door. It said Mr. Breakfast, although 2 of the letters had fallen sideways over time, making the building look even sadder and more depressing. At the front of the diner's empty parking lot was a giant, weather-worn, standalone statue of a smiling chef in a high toque, holding up a tray with the name of the diner across the top. Below it, on the marquee sign, were specialties of the house or community greetings like, "Welcome, Lion Club's member," might once have been listed, was a single sentence: "Solitude can be a moody companion." In an early influential article about Patterson's work, one art critic wrote, "What was so arresting about the photograph was because of the eerie way it was composed. It made a viewer feel the building itself was still somehow alive. The message on its giant sign was akin to street beggar's handwritten sign asking the world for help. Though, in the case of Mr. Breakfast, the place itself was saying, 'I don't want to be alone anymore.'" "Do you like the picture?" Ruth Murphy asked James Arthur. "Mr. Breakfast? Oh, yes, very much. It was the first Patterson I ever saw. So it was the picture that got me hooked. Don't you like it, Mrs. Murphy?" The old woman sighed and thought a bit before answering. "I have mixed feelings. I can appreciate it as a work of art, a famous image and all that. But I also remember what was going on in Graham's life then and how much confusion he was in at the time he took it. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You buy a new car and it runs great for a few guaranteed years without anything going wrong. After that, but only then, is it allowed to break down, not in the first month of ownership, not with only 2,690 miles on it, the damned machine, and most definitely not when you're just base jumped off the cliff of your old life into the great foggy unknown. Could anything else go wrong in the life of Graham Patterson? His career up in smoke, his love life down the toilet, his prospects for a rosy future? Forget it. More likely to fit his fat body through the eye of a needle at that point. The day after he bombed so badly at the comedy club in Providence, Rhode Island, Graham Patterson went to a car dealer and bought a brand new lipstick red Ford Mustang convertible right off the showroom floor. A check for 5 figures, boom, done. Next, he went to a camera shop and bought the Nikon he had been lusting after for months. because he wanted a photographic record of the trip he was about to take. He had a few $1,000s left in his bank account afterward, which would get him across the country to where his patient and very successful brother Joel was waiting with a job if he wanted it. What Patterson really wanted was to be paid to make people laugh, but it was never going to happen. He accepted that fact now, and he had finally resolved to give the dream of being a famous comedian a decent burial during this trip. He'd been trying for years to make it, but after so long, he knew in his heart it wasn't meant to be. It was time to accept the failure and make new plans for the rest of his life. His father used to say, "There comes a point." Patterson had reached that point in Providence. The quiet murmur of the audience in reaction to his best comedy routine was the final devastation. Add to this humiliation were the looks of indifference, impatience, and even derision on the faces of people who'd come to laugh but did not. To be fair, there had been a few chuckles here and there, an amused snort or two, and a few snickers at his best jokes, but the big loud ho-ho laughs at Graham Patterson's carefully crafted, tortuously worked over act, de nada, baby, nothing. So he buried his life's dream and drove away from the cemetery in the new convertible, which took him as far as North Carolina before it died, too. Luckily, the problem was only a defective fuel pump. It was covered under the warranty and could be fixed in an afternoon. While waiting for the car to be repaired, Patterson decided to grab a bite to eat and take a walk around town. 2 pulled pork sandwiches and a large Royal Crown Cola later, he felt a tad better about the shape of his predicament. A few blocks from the sandwich shop, on a small nondescript side street, he passed a tattoo parlor called Hardy Fuse. Thinking about it later, he didn't know if he stopped to look at in the window because of the odd name of the establishment or because of photos on display in the front window. Patterson was no tattoo connoisseur. He wasn't even much of a fan, but these were the most beautiful he had ever seen. Some were realistic, some abstract, but no matter where they were on the body, all of them were drawn and colored in such an arresting, singular way that it almost felt like the tattoos were speaking a whole new visual language to Patterson's eyes and sensibilities. He had never seen anything like them before. He had to go into the place to investigate. A bell above the door tinkled thinly when he opened it. Once he was inside, a low woman's voice with a heavy southern accent sang out, "Sorry, but we're closed." Patterson hesitated, wondering why the door was open if the store was closed. A moment later, the voice rang out, just kidding. Hold on, I'll be right out." Voila.
Thanks so much. So, as I know, because I've read the book and I hope other people will, getting a tattoo allows Graham to, he's at a crossroads to make a choice and to pick which direction his life is going to take in a more direct way than I think a lot of us get the chance to do, at least as far as I know. Have you ever felt that you were at a career or a life crossroads like that? And what did you do in that case?
I did. I was lucky. I taught for many years while writing. And the only other thing that I ever thought might be interesting would be to go to Hollywood and write movies for a while, see if that overtook my desire to write novels. So in the middle 90s, I went to Hollywood for 2 years and wrote screenplays. And then a very strong earthquake decided that it was time to go back to Vienna, even though very nice things had happened to me along the way while I was out there. I just realized I was a book writer and not a movie writer, and I went back to Vienna. So I got to choose, I got to experience that other life that fork in the road. And then I realized that I would prefer the A instead of B, and since then nothing else has made me want to move from where I am.
And did that experience inspire things like A Child Across the Sky and Arlen Ford being?
No, I had written all of those before I went to college. I knew what it was like. My father was a successful screenwriter, and I knew what that life was like. And not that the life was so interesting to me, but the idea of going into another kind of genre, which is, a script is about 90 to 100 pages long. A book usually revs up around page 150 of tight prose, whereas the screenplay is, got it, Joe? Yeah, I got it. I mean, it's a lot more abbreviated. And it was just an interesting experience for me to do both. But the books about Hollywood, I wrote before I went out to Hollywood.
It's interesting. I think the experience I have from your books is that a lot of them seem to be about a secret of reality which the characters never knew about before. Do you think that there's a big secret underlying reality that no one knows about, or that somebody knows about?
I'm an agnostic about that. I've never seen it or experienced it, but lots of other people have. So, either they're all crazy or there's something there. So when people say, do you believe in ghosts? I go, I don't know. Or they say, do you think there's, a parallel life that's going on to this one? And I go, it could be. I never say no.
I mean, I think it's interesting because I noticed references in the book to A Child Across the Sky, The Land of Laughs, and Outside the Dog Museum. And for all I know, there were other references that I didn't even pick up. And they all sort of are about having this sort of ground pulled out under from the characters and realizing that there's this other reality. And in a certain way, you're sort of suggesting that all of those different kinds of glimpses into the true nature of the universe simultaneously exist at the same time.
I think that's true. I think that makes life more interesting. I think that, if what is your everyday suddenly shifts in another direction, you're awakened in a way that you're not normally. We are so used to our everyday blah blah that when something like a dog talks, it snaps you out of that blah blah and makes you at least come awake in a very different and special way. And that's what happens a lot of the time in the books that I've written.
But I think it's interesting that you say that, because I think in a lot of cases, and I'm not going to say which way it goes in this book, like that knowledge doesn't lead to happiness. I mean, they have the knowledge, but it almost makes things worse in a way.
Yeah, one reviewer said that my books are both melancholic and joyous, which made me smile when I saw it. And I think that's a pretty good description.
I mean, I'm just particularly thinking of Black Cocktail, which is, one of my favorites of yours, but it's like a punch in the face at the end. I mean, it's not like you sort of shouldn't have been able to see some of it coming, but it still feels like a punch in the face.
Yeah, I remember that. But what I'm thinking of right now is my book, A Child Across the Sky, which is basically a Faust story. This remarkable person is tempted by the devil to do his best. He's a film director, and he's tempted to do something that he loves to do, but for a bad reason. And it's pretty tempting. And at the end, I think that it's very mixed about what the conclusion is. He creates a masterpiece, but etc.
Barbara Krasnov, our audience wrangler, asks, she says, I think many of us wonder what would have happened if we made different choices. Do you suppose that this is a question that we approach as we get older?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, when you're young, you're so full of beans, and you're pretty sure that what you're doing is the right thing, the right direction that you take. Whereas when you have more life experience, you go, well, maybe not. Maybe it would have been better if I zipped left instead of right. Not that that's bad. It means that you're more contemplative.
And my friend Sonia Rist asks, I'd like to know what it's like to be an American writer in Vienna. Is there a writing community there? Is it easy to buckle down and write there?
There is not, as far as I know, there is no writing community, certainly not in English. Um, it it's kind of mixed. I mean, if you don't speak the language really well, there's a kind of isolation that sets in. But I have always kind of enjoyed that because people leave you alone to do what you really want to get done. Whereas when I was in Los Angeles, I was distracted by everything. I would eavesdrop on conversations. I'd watch too much television. I'd go to too many movies, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas here, it's much more limited and kind of monastic, and I like it very much. What's it like as an American to live here? It's just a whole different culture. You have to get used to, as an American, people here, for example, are not particularly warm or warm-hearted. Whereas in America, everybody's friendly, and it took me a long time to get used to that. It's not that they're bad or that they're grumpy. It's just that they're much more private. America is not a particularly private place, and so those kind of elements take a while to get used to. But after a while, I kind of prefer them.
I think to a certain extent, you also create your own artistic community in your books. I mean, I noticed that a lot of your characters tend to be artists. They're photographers, they're actors, they're filmmakers, and or even, you know, Harry Radcliffe, the architect, and Outside the Dog Museum. Is it important for you to sort of explore the artistic process in your work?
Selfishly, a lot of the stuff that I write about is stuff that interests me. At the time that I was writing Outside the Dog Museum, I was fascinated by architecture, and I talked to some of the most famous architects in the world before writing and got their take on certain things, and they told me stuff that I never in a million years would have thought as a non-architect. For example, one of these guys said to me, he always makes it a practice to visit a site that they want him to build on 20 times. He wants it in the day, in the night, with the shadows, with the rain, with the snow, you know, and I 20 times? He said, oh yes. Then I know the feeling that I want to project into the project. And actually, I think I put that into the book, but it's been a long time since I read it. But things like that, and filmmakers. I talk to filmmakers all the time, so that I think the artistic impulse is very obvious in my books often, because you know we're all of a family and interrelate.
Well, Barbara is back again with a question that I know the answer to, but I'm sure she'd rather hear it from you. She says, okay, I've got to ask, are there any important dogs featured in Mr. Breakfast?
There are two dogs, but they don't get the limelight for very long. They don't talk, but they're very sweet.
But see, I'm not sure that I would agree, because in a certain sense, what I think is interesting in the book is that in order to activate choices, everybody picks their dog, the name of their first dog. And obviously, you're at least implying that that is one of the most central and important things, because that's what people hold on to. It's not like your mother's maiden name or something, it's your dog's name.
I thought it was funny when I was. It's interesting you say that, because when I wrote it, I said I want the most mundane thing in the world for the most magical thing to happen. So, for example, if I had him say Merlin, that was the name of my first dog, it would be a tip-off that something that was coming. Whereas Pinecone is so utterly banal that you almost challenge it in your mind. Why would a word as silly as that, first to name your dog that, and secondly, for it to open up a kind of, abracadabra. I like how the two things conflicted.
See, it doesn't feel, I mean, I guess because of the way that you put dogs in your work, dogs are clearly so important that to me that actually basically says something about who these people are at their core. I mean, who their dogs are and how they feel about them. So I mean, I'm not sure I'd agree with you.
That's fine. I mean, a thing that I'm constantly sort of bombarded with, particularly on Facebook, where people are all often asking questions. When I finish a book, whatever I intended doesn't matter. It's how you take it. I mean, in this case, for you, it means this, that, and the other thing. And to me, not that it's the opposite, but it's completely different. And I like that. I like that people come to the books with, jousting. No, it didn't mean this. It meant that. And they're adamant about it. And I think that that's, a sign of a good book, that people have very strong feelings about parts that you may either contest or shrug about.
Facebook, actually bringing up Facebook is interesting to me, because I was thinking about another theme in the book, which I think also pervades some of actually a lot of your other work, which is Facebook sort of lays bare the ways in which we're all connected to each other, I think, and that you sometimes find out, how did you know this person who's from this completely different part of my life? And it lays bare this interconnectedness. And if there's one of the important themes in this book, at least as I saw it, is this idea that we're all connected in ways that we often never see or truly understand, but what you do has effects on those people, and it sort of behooves you to think about that as you act.
I recently, do you know what the French and also now English word silage means? Sillage. It's the scent of perfume as a person passes through a room. The scent that lasts. So, for example, you walk past a drunk, you can smell the alcohol 5 steps on. And I think that, and my analogy that I wrote about was, people in your life, when they leave your life, leave a silage of emotions, of effects, of love, of whatever it is. And they may forget you or whatever it is that sticks with you, whereas to you it remains very important. And I think that silage is one of the things that connects us. And I think that you're spot on with the word connect here. That somebody that mattered to me a long time ago pops up in my memory now and says, "Oh, do you remember X?" And suddenly I go, "No, but it's interesting you did." And I mean, that's a connection that matters. It matters a lot to them.
Yeah,
Or to you.
no, I agree completely. I mean, I just often find that I meet somebody and something I said had an effect on them, and I didn't realize that was significant, or people have done that for me, and I don't know that they know. And I think it behooves us all to walk carefully in this life, because you don't know.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was on a book tour, and in one store that I went to in America, they had a photographer who took pictures of all the authors who read there. And he was very anxious to talk to me. And he said, I have to tell you, your work is very important to me and my wife, because it brought us together. I showed her Sleeping in Flame, and she loved it as much as I, blah, blah, blah. And there was one line in that book that was so important to us that we had it engraved on our wedding rings when we got hitched. I said, "Oh, really? Oh, I'm very touched. What's the word? What's the sentence?" And he took off his ring and he handed it to me, and it said something like, "Don't forget to open the door," or "I forgot to buy the news." Something so banal, so unimportant. It was hard for me not to start. First of all, to go, "What?" and to laugh, because to this guy and his wife, that unbelievably uninteresting line from this book that I had written. I thought he was going to come up with one of the great lines that I'd written for. No, it was open the door, will you, Billy? And I said, well, that's really interesting. Why that line? And he kind of explained it to me. And I never forgot that, you know, and it made me realize what's important to you in a book could be utterly nothing to someone else. And it's, you know, what you're talking about.
I mean, I think in your case, what it is what you said at the beginning of the reading, which is you needed to start at the beginning of the book because a lot of it doesn't make sense in context. And I think that a lot of seemingly mundane sentences in your work carry on newer meaning and deeper meaning because they happen after a lot of other things have happened. There's like a whole bunch of extra meaning attached to it that it wouldn't ordinarily have, maybe.
That certainly could be, but I mean, this, as I remember it happened a long time ago. This line was really unimportant. I mean, to me, this line was like, you know, do you want tomato or potato soup? And I was kind of shocked when I was very touched, but I was also shocked that this line, which to me meant nothing, was so important to him and his wife that I was delighted that anything I wrote was important to them, but this one in particular, and I remember that it kind of struck me like what you're talking about with connections. How am I supposed to know what's going to land in somebody's psyche that you create?
And Barbara also notes, and I think she's right, I also think that sometimes readers see things in novels the writers either didn't see or didn't mean, and that's okay too.
100%. 100%.
Well, I just want to remind the audience that they can feel free to ask any questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking. One of the other things that I think is interesting about your work is that you definitely seem to be comfortable at writing at different lengths. You know, you've got a huge oeuvre of short stories. I mean, one of the reasons why The Woman Who Married a Cloud is a virtual book for me, an ebook for me, is because it's so darn big. And then you also have, you know, individual, you know, novellas like Black Cocktail or Heidelberg's Cylinder. And then you also have, you know, your novels. And sort of what inspires you to write at different lengths, and how is that a different process for you?
It was funny, the other day in one of the reviews, it said, this is Carroll's first novel in many years. And then he said something like, you know, we've been waiting so long for something, you know, new. And I went, something new? In the last 5 years, I published a 600-page collection of short stories and a 600-page book of small essays. So, you know, stuff has been coming out. It's just, you know, not the novels. I think that I always call a short story, for example, a 100-yard dash, and a novel, a marathon. And it's just, for me, usually I can tell what a thing is going to be in terms of its length after I've written about 10 pages. And sometimes, for example, what I thought was going to be a short story turns out to be a novel, and vice versa. A friend of mine said, can you write a novella? I said, I don't know. This was before I said, how long is a novella? And they said, well, about 50 to 90 pages. I said, I could try. And that's where I think Heidelberg's is the first novella I wrote. Yeah, I think so. But that was completely, you know, it was like an experiment for me. Can I come up with something that's long but short in comparison to a novel?
It's interesting to me because when I think about how your work lands with me, it's kind of like traveling down a screw, because you have this thing where you present people with a reality, that reality is not what you think it is. And then you go and you say, well, actually, this other thing that you just told you is not entirely true. It's this other thing. And you keep going down and it keeps twisting around. And it's interesting for me to see how you get to that point of the screw and when we're going to get there.
Yeah, sometimes you don't.
Well, that's true too.
I don't know if that was intentional or accidental.
Because
I remember when I wrote my book, Voice of Our Shadow, the narrator, it's written in the first person, and the narrator tells this very elaborate story for pages. And then he suddenly stops and goes, no, this is a lie. What really happened was this. And I got such a tickle out of that. It came from I had no idea that sort of thing was going to come about until I literally wrote the thing, no, this is a lie, or whatever it was. And I said, wow, that's kind of interesting. Why is it a lie? And then I went in the direction that the rest of the book followed. So in a way, it's some of those twists on the screw are either accidental or even surprising to me.
Jim Freund, our esteemed producer, is wondering, why was there a delay between the European and American debuts of Mr. Breakfast?
COVID. I changed agents in the middle of the flurry. Copyright stuff. There's a whole kind of mixed salad of reasons why it didn't come out at the same time as the other two.
Do you often have different experiences with the American and European editors? I mean, I'm thinking specifically, there's a reason why I have 2 copies of Kissing the Beehive, and it's because they have slightly different endings in the American and English versions.
Yeah. Sometimes, I mean, I don't remember which book. I guess it was Beehive. The British editor wanted either a toughening or a loosening of the very end of it, whereas the American was okay with it. And you know, I'm easy to edit, and the only time I ever get kind of stiff-backed about it is when an editor says to me, "Can you do ding ding ding?" And I go, "No, it's just not. It doesn't fit." Whereas most of the time, I've been very, very lucky to have very good editors, particularly Ellen Datlow, who knows what I'm trying to do, and she only improves it whenever I hand it to her. And with that kind of support, if the editor says to me, "Can you do this or that?" Most of the time, I say yes, sure.
But I mean, does it often come up where you would have to reconcile what an American European that you can?
No, they very rarely. When I write so many drafts before I hand the book in, that there's usually very little that they say about it. David Hartwell edited Bones of the Moon, and he wanted something special at the very end, and I thought it was a good idea, and I said, sure, okay, I can do that. So in that sense, I've never had a big fight with an editor. You know, like I read that David Foster Wallace used to throw his books across the manuscripts across the room if the editor disagreed with him. I've never had that. I've had good editors, and they've made nice suggestions.
Well, you know, Ellen and I are in the midst of a dispute right now because I like the Book of Mormon a lot more than she did when we went to see it last week. But anyway, Sonia Rist was wondering, how much do you outline your novels in advance? And does that have any role in the surprising elements of your novels?
None at all. I always say that there are 2 kinds of writers. There's writers like John Irving who know everything, or they say everything from A to Z. In fact, Irving, he says, writes the end of a novel and then goes back and to the beginning and writes to that ending. And the second kind of writer is what I call walking the big dog, which is you have a big, Doberman or something like that. You open the door and it flies out, and all you can do is barely hold on to the leash. And I'm one of those writers, because for me, I know I can start a novel when I know one of 2 things: the first line or the title. And once one or both of those come to me, then I can I can go, and I don't know what's going to go on from page to page. I have an outline. To me is impossible.
And you don't get blocked in that kind of situation, or?
I only got blocked once with the Marriage of Sticks, and luckily I just kind of stopped. I said, now what do I do? And I said, at the time, someone asked me to write a screenplay of one of my novels, and that's when I went out to California. So luckily, it came at a perfect time to be blocked, and I went out, and for 2 years I didn't think about it. When I came back, I wrote the end of it like a shot. It was just coming back from outside, and I knew it had to be done.
I do also notice that your novels are pretty tight, and they're usually not much, like 300 or something like that would be a hard stop for you in a world where people are increasingly writing these big tomes. That's not something that you would ever be interested in, or?
No. I was once offered a large, huge amount of money to write a horror novel. And I thought about it, and I thought, this is going to take me at least 2 years. And I'm going to live with these creepy, horrible people for 700 days. And just that alone, the idea of writing a huge novel about something not nice was repellent to me. And I've kind of toyed with the idea of writing a 500-page book, but I never found a subject that I thought would warrant that. So I write 250, 300-page books, and that's all I've got to say about the story.
And then I guess it limits your exposure to some of the more unpleasant people who show up in your books then.
Well, I think I think it was Zadie Smith, the novelist, who said, I write what I can. And I thought that was a really nice line. What I have in me is my material. And if my material is an 800-page fantasy, or Tolkien or something like that, then that's what you write. And in my case, it's a lot less. But I've written a lot of books. And I've also written a sextet where all the characters are interconnected. So in that sense, if you that's 1,200 pages of books, more or less, with stops in between for new
Because you
ideas.
come across the same characters, then
Well, it's kind of an one. The critic John Clute called the sextet that I wrote the Answered Prayers sextet, and I never thought of it as that. It's just these characters were interesting to me, so let's continue them. And so in that sense, it's a very long book because Joe jumps over to the book number 3 and becomes a semi-main character, and then Susie from book 4 dies in book 6, things like that. So it's a kind of invisible chain.
I mean, of course, I know who you mean by Susie, so I'm not going to say. But Barbara Krasnov has an interesting question. She asks, for many writers, the COVID pandemic has had an effect, either making it harder to write or making them more productive during lockdown. Did it have any effect on your writing?
It did in a way but it was mixed with, I had finished Mr. Breakfast right as COVID became serious. I remember I handed it in on my birthday. I sent it in on my birthday to the agent that I had before, the one I have now. And so in a way, after I finish a novel, I usually need a decompression of at least a few months. I don't think about writing. I just start to read again. So in that sense, COVID didn't affect my work much because of the fact I just slipped in under the wire with Mr. Breakfast, and I didn't write for a year. No, I wrote some short stories, but as far as longer things, no.
So I mean, basically, just things lined up for you in the way that they would creatively in any other instance.
In a way, yes, it did. It's in a kind of horrible way because it was COVID, but the end of the book came at a very, very good time for me because I don't know how I would have done Mr. Breakfast in the middle of COVID. It so spooked the world, and even Vienna, which is kind of quiet anyway. It was a dead town, and then you go out into the world at that time, and it's remember the movie On the Beach? Do you ever see the movie On the Beach? There's a scene where a submarine comes into San Francisco Harbor, and they look at the streets through the periscope, and it's absolutely empty, absolutely empty. And I kept thinking about that when COVID was around. I kept thinking about On the Beach, and here I am living through it. So I don't know how that would have affected my creativity.
Do you think, I mean, because I know COVID has inspired a lot of people to write a COVID novel, either overtly or covertly. Is it likely to?
Not for me. I'm more than happy to see it, go out the back door. I don't want to think about it or how it affects either real people or my characters. It's not a pleasant subject for me.
I do think that what you just said, though, that whole sensation of walking through a ghost town where there is nobody there to react to is a powerful thing, and I think that's an image I think has come up with some of your things where it's like, well, no one can hear me or see me or anything like that. I think
there's a kind of isolation, particularly when a person has these extraordinary experiences. The dogs talk and what other strange stuff. I mean, I am the only witness. I am the only one who saw it or heard it or experienced it. And I don't know if I should share it or keep it to myself, or will they think I'm crazy? There's that isolation, which comes with the extraordinary feeling. And a friend of mine adamantly says that they've seen ghosts, and they describe them in absolutely great detail. And I'm sure she feels sort of strange about that. She is convinced she has seen a ghost. No, ghosts, plural. And when she told me the story, I said, I don't know what to say. If you saw ghosts, you saw ghosts, as far as I'm concerned. But she looked at me like, are you believing me, or do you think I'm nuts? I believe you.
So is that why in this book, I think there are characters who have had a shared set of experiences, and they are able to communicate with each other up to a certain extent. I mean,
yes, the ones who have the tattoo. But what's really interesting to me was the fact that those with the tattoo don't all choose the same fate. I think it's kind of 50-50. As far as I know, there are 1, 2, 3. There are 4 people who have the tattoo, and he meets, besides himself, he meets 2 of them and sort of another one who had it and then didn't have it anymore. So he kind of experiences the whole range of how people react to this thing. So they're just in a kind of small magical minority of 4. As far as we know, there may be other people, but we don't see them in the story.
See, I found myself wondering if the character Barbara had a tattoo and we just didn't know it. But I mean, don't tell me.
I don't. I can't answer that.
I don't. I just, I feel like she gets a little bit hard done by in the book. Her lives are not so great.
It's true. It's true.
But I don't really want to spoil that for anybody else. But since a lot of that happens towards the end of the book, I feel like I'm not revealing too much.
No, don't give me.
I say nothing. Anyway, I think this might be, unless anybody has any last minute questions, I think this might be a good opportunity to bring this to a close. And Jim just posted a link to the book. And if you buy it through that link, then we all get a quiz. And I also just think it's a good idea in general to support Melville Books, which is a smaller press. And I think smaller presses are what keep publishing interesting. And before, the primary thing that I knew about, Melville was that it published the works of Herman Melville, and that they sell a lot of merchandise with Bartleby the Scrivener most famous quote, "I would prefer not to," which is my favorite chimp shirt. So I just think it's good for those of us in the U.S. to support. Incidentally, Brooklyn, at least, I mean, I believe they have a London office as well, but a Brooklyn-based small press. Since I'm in Brooklyn, Barbara and Jim are in Brooklyn. Ideally, we can bring the series back to Brooklyn. So support a Brooklyn press and support one of my very, very, very favorite authors by buying a copy of Mr. Breakfast. I feel you will not be sorry. So I just wanted to thank you so much for taking time out to read and talk with me today, and for Jim Freund for keeping this series going, and to Barbara Krasnoff to wrangling our audience. And thanks for our audience for showing up either now or in the future after they watch this on YouTube or Facebook. So thank you to everybody. This is really great.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where in the world you happen to be.